So, hello everyone, and welcome to today's podcast. So, we have a very special guest today with us. I present to you Mark Littler. Mark offers bespoke whiskey brokerage and investment services and is one of our trusted experts whenever it comes to whiskey investments. Welcome, Mark. It's really great to have you here on the show.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me, and nice to meet everyone. It's always good to talk about these things, and me and you've worked together for quite a while now. But if anyone isn't aware of me or what I do, I'm a whiskey broker. But head over to our YouTube channel, just search for Mark Littler in YouTube, and we're very focused on education. So rather than the hard sell, which some of you will probably be sick of if you've spoken to whiskey investment companies, we're completely education based, because it's my opinion that if an investment's good enough, it should sell itself. It doesn't need somebody pushing it to it. So, knowledge is power in that respect.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Mark, for the nice introduction. And I follow your YouTube channel, so I really like your videos, especially on the educational side as well. So I always learn a lot about whiskey investments in general, and as well, like whenever it always inspires me to purchase new whiskey. So that's always the thing. Whenever I watch your channel, then I feel like I should buy a new bottle of whiskey and add it to my collection.
Yeah, no, it's good. It's good fun. It takes a lot of time and energy, but it's really good. We enjoy it. So
I can really only recommend that. And now for this special podcast, so having you here, we thought like we ask our kind of audience what questions they do have when it comes to whiskey bottle investments as well. So we collected a couple of very nice questions. Thanks a lot to the people who submitted as well the questions. And barely can't wait to get your answers on the various questions. And with that, I would just like directly kick off and raise the first questions, which is, what are the top 5 modern bottles you would pick as an investment?
Yeah, I mean, this is a question that we get asked an awful lot, as you can imagine, and there's lots of different ways in which you can address it. So I think I'll sort of caveat this by saying that these are going to be bottles that say less than £1,500. We offer bespoke advice above that price, to family offices and people with tens of thousands to invest. But these bottles are for, say, like the average person can afford sort of between £300 and £1,500. These are the ones for you. Now, before I sort of mention the bottles, you've got to remember there's a few different ways in which a bottle could grow as an investment. So the most basic level is to look at something that's already in the market and already doing really well, and you're already seeing the returns and investment, and then you jump on that bandwagon. And that's fine as long as you understand the fundamental things that are propping up that value. So, like, why has it jumped from £300 to £1,000? If you don't understand that, then maybe be a bit cautious. Don't just follow the herd. Don't just follow the greater fool theory sort of thing. The other side of things with investment is to spot bottles and brands that are undervalued in the market. Now, this is not the fashionable way to do it, because it's going to take longer. I think a lot of people come to alternative investments thinking, I'm going to buy today, and in 6 months I'm going to have tripled my money and it's all good. And brilliant. If you can do that, do it. But it's just like playing roulette. There's no sort of science to that. So we tend to take a bit more of a calculated sort of approach to it. So the first 3 bottles, and these are all the same bottles of the same series, are all from the Glenfarclas distillery. Again, I've covered this on YouTube. You've got the 30-year-old warehouse collection, the new 35-year-old warehouse collection, and the 40-year-old warehouse collection. Now, the 30-year-old RRP is £500 for 30-year-old whiskey. Macallan, that's sort of circa £3,000. The 35-year-old RRP is sort of like £800-900, and then the 40-year-old is sort of circa £1,000, £1,200. Like, you don't really need to be that into whiskey to know that they're very low prices for very high age statements. A Macallan 40-year-old, for instance, is 15-20 grand. These are fundamentally undervalued because, for whatever reason, Glenfarclas isn't fashionable with investors. One of those reasons is the brand. It's family owned, and they don't necessarily push things in a very investment orientated way, like Macallan putting things in the leak, and like Bowmore teaming up with Aston Martin. They're gearing up to attract a certain demographic. But Glenfarclas, they make solid whiskey, very sherry influenced whiskey, amazing and sort of quite approachable Speyside whiskey. And for some reason, it's never sort of really picked up with the collectors. Now, the thing with these warehouse collection ones that are different is that they're in really nice, beautiful red, warehouse door boxes. It marks a bit of a change away. They are core range bottles, but on each bottle, you'll have a bottling date, etched into the glass. And it's the same with Springbank. Springbank 2 or 3 years ago was, dawdling along, and then all of a sudden collectors gone, wow, this, or investors went, this is amazing. And then you start seeing the prices grow exponentially. That hasn't happened yet with Glenfarclas. So you look at the fundamental things here. They're 5, 8 and £1,200, and they're 30, 35 and 40-year-old whiskey. There is something fundamental beneath that purchase. So I think they're a really, really solid buy. Now, the other two, you asked for 5, so there's 3. The other 2 are a bit more straightforward. The Macallan 18-year-olds, they're released every year, about £320, and you can build a vertical of them. In 2020, I don't know if anyone watching this remembers, but there was a news story about a boy who was given a bottle of 18-year-old Macallan every year for his birthday, and then he sold it to buy a house, or he sold it for about 45 grand. We brokered that sale, so it was me and Matthew. It was Matthew's collections, and we brokered that sale for him. And the 18-year-olds, again, it's slightly different than the Glenfarclas in terms of there is historic precedent for their growth, and they grow steadily each year. They're very approachable, sort of 300, 320 pounds a bottle, and do what I'm doing. I've got a 5-year-old son born in 2018. Every year I buy him the new release. So he's got the 18, the 19, the 20, the 21, the 22, and we'll buy him the 23 this year. So when he's 18, he's going to have a beautiful vertical of 18 bottles of Macallan. And you know what? I'm not worried about cashing that out until the end of those 18 years. So the growth in the meantime is by the by. And then sort of like the next one, it's probably the most expensive out of all of these. But it's sort of like a hybrid between the two. So it's from the Lafroig distillery. So arguably more collectible than Glenfarclas, but not as much as Macallan. And it's the Ian Hunter series. They're very similar in design to both the Macallan archival series, which everybody raves about, and there's a Macallan 80 or Tales of Macallan that they released. Now, the archival series is a tin with a bottle that sits in a piece of foam in the middle. The Tales of Macallan is a book with all the pages cut out. This Lafroig one fits somewhere between the two. It's leather bound, it's in the shape of a book. You open it up and there's a beautiful space inside the book with pages as well in there. But the key thing with this is it's really old whiskey. So the most recent release is 34-year-old Lafroig for about £1,000, £1,200. They're doing a 15-bottle series in this, and the age statement is growing each year. So while you may think it's more fashionable to go and buy the folios because they've had a huge increase in value already, these Lafroigs, they're really well presented, high age statements, and quite affordably priced. So I've bought all of those. We're going to release a video on that soon as well if you want a bit more of an in-depth look into those. But yeah, they're my picks, and you don't have to spend a lot of money with those to get a good collection moving.
Well, really cool. So 3 times Glenfarclas, 1 time Macallan, and 1 time Lafroig.
Exactly.
Okay, very nice. I thought like there would be way more Macallan bottles in there, but that's again me not being as deep into the market as you are. So it's
yeah, and these are ones that are potentially sort of like not as highly rated as others, but they've got. You look at the fundamental aspects of them, all it's going to take is a perception shift in the market and the price goes crazy. It's very easy to sort of see that.
Yeah, I really like the rationale behind the explanation. So it truly makes sense.
Yeah.
Then the next question, you already mentioned the short holding period, and the question goes basically into that direction. So it was like, how long do I need to be invested in whiskey in order to make money?
I think the obvious answer is that if it was quick to make money in the short term, then there'd be a lot more institutional investment in whiskey bottles. The reality of it is that it's a subjective market. Prices rise and fall. And historically, people have made huge amounts of money flipping bottles of whiskey. So you buy it on release, you stick it in auction, and you make a load of profit. Now, that was easy to do. You could argue that in a 5-year hold, you could have seen 100, 200, 300% margin on some of these. But that was probably buying between 2015 and 2020. And at that point, we kind of saw a transition in the market going from whiskey being seen as a drink to whiskey being seen as a status symbol. So it started down here in 2015 and ended up here in 2020. Now, what's happened since 2020 is the market, it hasn't stagnated, but the growth has definitely been slower. We've gone through that paradigm shift. We've gone through that transformation, and retail pricing is catching up with the secondary market. So instead of just releasing a bottle at £200 that's then going to sell for £2,000, the retailers are going, and the distilleries are going, well, let's release this at £1,500. The Carazao Geisha series, when you look at those, historically there was a huge amount of profit left in them. But then if you look at the past, sort of like the Ruby and was it the Sapphire that came before them, they were very exceptionally priced at retail. And you look at the average price since the release, it's averages at pretty much the retail. So look, minimum 5 years. Like if you want to come in for a shorter period of time than that, then that's absolutely fine. But just be aware that markets move down as well as up. Look what's happened in the watch market recently. We've had portions of that market dropping considerably, and we've seen the same in the whiskey market. And you come back to that point that I made earlier, the bottles that have suffered the most are the ones that have had the least propping up their value. So they didn't have as many fundamental elements propping their values up. The high age statement that old and rare bottles, they've always been steady away. It's just this rise of the modern limited editions, and are investors to blame for the state of this market? Because a lot of people talk down about investment in whiskey, but even investors are just reacting to products that are being put forward to them by the industry, I would say. So does every bottle need to be a limited edition, even if it's like 2,000 bottles? Of course, no. Does whiskey improve in a big oak presentation case and Lalique or fancy crystal decanters? Of course it doesn't. These are all not tricks, but these are all tools used by marketing people to try and make you buy it. And they're clearly appealing or trying to appeal to the ultra high net worth collectors at the top of the core, the top of the series. And by default, by trying to push the very top end of their market, they lift the value of their lower offerings, because it becomes an aspirational brand. So I can't afford their £80,000 release, but I'm on board with these. They're only £600. I'm part of that brand, and you feel part of that inclusion. So it's, so with these changes that have happened, with more people coming in, 0 to 5 years is it's possible, but I would say you'd have to be buying very, very cleverly in that respect. But look at it in a medium term. Look at 5 to 10 years. Look at how much the world has changed in the last 5 years. It's phenomenal. So whiskey, I don't think it's going anywhere. So let's sort of, define it as sort of like 5 years plus. The longer you leave it, the greater your returns are going to be. So
like mid to long term investment, definitely. And like maybe relating to the first question which we had, and the Glenfarclas bottles. So obviously they have like a relative low price. So this is a distillery which doesn't like kind of say, hey, look, I have a 30-year-old whiskey, I can sell that now for $3,000 on the market. So they're really kind of offering a price for people who still appreciate the whiskey and rather not invest into it. And so this is as well why those bottles have a bit the higher potential to develop within as well a shorter time frame, I assume.
Yes, exactly. Because all you're looking here, I think a very good point to understand about the majority of the whiskey market is that when you're looking at collectors and investors, no one gives a crap about the whiskey. The whiskey is irrelevant, and a good way to sort of quantify that is if you look at the Black Bowmore final edition, came out in 1995. £100 a bottle. It's worth £15,000 at auction now. You then take that bottle and then you do what Aston Martin and Bowmore did. So Bowmore took back some of their own whiskey. They rebottled it, this time in association with Aston Martin. So they took back some of that same whiskey from that final edition, rebottled it with Aston Martin. And the last time one of those sold at auction was £115,000. So the same whiskey in two different packages, there's £100,000 difference in price. It's just perception. Look at Diamond Dial Daytonas or something, or look at the Rainbow Dial Daytona. It's fundamentally, the movements of the watch are no different than the standard Daytona, but one's several £100,000, one's not. It's not to do with its original function. It's to do with the how it's perceived and the perception of that value and the status that gives you. So with those Glenfarclas, the only thing that's missing there in terms of its pricing is a shift in the perception from the people viewing and buying those bottles. Springbank released their 30-year-old at what, £800 a bottle or something like that, and it's now selling at auction for £2,000 or £3,000. Glenfarclas released their 30-year-old at £500 at retail, and you can still buy it at £500 at retail. Like, the only thing that's missing is everyone watching this, going, "Well, hang on a minute, that's undervalued, that, you know." But the problem is, with whiskey and collecting and investing in whiskey, there's not enough education for people to make these decisions themselves, in terms of there's not many reference books and things written. So most people just follow the herd. They see a bottle growing in value, and then they jump on board, and it's kind of like the greater fool theory, and all of a sudden it tops out, and then there's a correction, and then it will start going, you know. So that's, yeah, it's a good point.
Yeah. Cool, interesting. And right on to the next question, and I'm super curious about that, because like whenever I watch your reels as well on social media, I see like tons of bottles which go through your hand, and you very nicely always present them. And so the question is, like, what was the most unique bottles which ever went through your hands? So maybe like the top 3 bottles whichever went through
and I think
hands.
if we sort of like, if we kick off most unique as a term, because most unique, you know, some of the most unique bottles would be like very abstract blends from the 1900s, which are interesting but not necessarily valuable in a way. The ones that I've taken the most, you know, interest out of, you know, we had that Matthew Robson 18-year-old vertical, and that was a vertical from like all the way from sort of like the 1970s vintages all the way up to the current bottlings. And it's, you know, I love verticals, you know, we're going to come to this, I think. So that was great to see, and it was a great sort of proof that there is demand for these sort of verticals, and there is just something nice about sort of seeing all of them together. And that, you know, in 2020 we got a phenomenal amount of press out of that for some reason. It's the end of COVID, and we went, you know, we put a press release out as we normally do, and it literally got picked up from New York to India to, it just, the story went wild. So that's always going to have a special place in my heart, that collection. Another one that's sort of very sort of special is, I can't really talk about it because it's ongoing. The Peter Blake bottles that we did, we ended up working with the Peter Blake Decades box. We ended up working with the designer who produced the book that went in there, so Phil Cleaver. And then from that, we ended up going into a really deep dive into the history of it. And it turned out that it wasn't a box that was always made to celebrate Peter Blake's birthday. It was a box that Macallan kind of said, we need to package 8 decades of whiskey. And then David Holmes, the art director, said, oh, well, Peter Blake's turning 80. I know him well. We did the 1926 60-year-old with him. And then so we got all this weird insight and understanding into the market from the people who actually made the products there. And then on the back of that, David Holmes, I don't know if many people of you know who David Holmes is, but David Holmes is one of the, like, probably the most important people to have worked at Macallan ever, because he's the one that was, you know, he's the creative director from sort of like the 1970s all the way through to the 1990s. He did the anniversary malts, the royal marriages, you know, really amazing guy. And we're now, bizarrely enough, working with his son, and his son is the designer for the Macallan Folio series. And we're working on a very special release, an independent release of Macallan with him. So it's kind of like through that one weird phone call about these Peter Blake boxes, I'm now actually working with the son of one of the most famous designers of Macallan and chatting to all the former directors and Nick Salomon and all these sorts of people about it. So that's another one that's really sort of key to my heart. And then, you know what, like I think this is a tragic thing as well. And this doesn't sort of reflect to one particular bottle, but one particular group of people. And you can take a lesson of this, people. I deal with so many widows that have got bottles of whiskey to sell, and they contact us for evaluation, and they end up with this really nice bottle of whiskey, and you ask why they've got it or how they've got it, and it was their husband's bottle, and it was for them to drink on a special occasion, and they never got round to that special occasion. And, you know, there's a lesson in life. You know, if you've got a special bottle that you want to drink with friends, like, crack on. Like, life's too short. You don't know what's coming. You will always defer it. The most important thing is to make memories, because you can't take any of this whiskey with you. So, you know what? Open that bottle go and see your friends, go and see your dad, whatever it is, and just do it. You know what I mean? So, and those bottles are unique and interesting because they kind of tell a story that's never been told, and I think that's quite sad, unfortunately. So
absolutely, yeah, absolutely. But I like your statement that whenever you have time and friends over, like, start to share your whiskey with them and enjoy the glass rather than keeping it until you can't enjoy it.
Exactly. The best whiskey is the whiskey's drunk with friends. Whiskey on your own it doesn't taste the same. You know what I mean? There's no fun to it.
Absolutely. And the next question is, like, where do you see the whiskey bottle market in 10 years from now, especially as well considering the rising production levels of whiskeys? Like, when you read about Macallan and the new distillery and the increasing production, like, what impact does that as well have on the prices of the bottles? What do you expect?
Yeah, I've already touched on this, so we don't have to sort of go to like, I won't, because this is a really interesting part, like a really interesting subject. If you look at that change in the market between 2015 and 2020, we went through this paradigm shift. You know, we went through whiskey being from a drink to a status symbol, and this is broadly what I studied as my master's, like the sociological or the social construct of value in cultural goods. So bizarrely enough, whiskey is now a status symbol. It's up there with classic cars, handbags, watches, jewelry, paintings, whatever. You know, it's a status symbol. In my experience, I've never known a sector or category of luxury goods stop signifying wealth and status. So jewelry is never going to stop signifying wealth and status. Watches are never going to stop signifying wealth and status. You will have changes in position at the top of the pack. So, for instance, you know, Macallan, for a long time, Macallan weren't the most dominant brand. It was Dalmore. Dalmore had all the world records, and then Macallan took over that mantle. There are brands coming through the ranks that will be toppling Macallan. And I do think there's a certain stagnation as well with brands. When they get to a certain point, they kind of try and repeat. And then they just get boring in terms of what they're outputting. So, whereas the people that are beneath them are more creative and engage bigger audiences. And you can see this with new distilleries that are selling 0 to, you know, new make whiskey or, you know, 3-year, 5-year-old whiskey. And they're selling it for £100 a bottle. And it's like, wow, they've really done well. You know, Macallan have to wait 12 years to sell their 12-year-old at £70 a bottle. But so it's this engagement. Now, where I see the market going, I don't think whiskey is going to stop signifying wealth. I do think we're going to see like a split in the market at some point where a lot of the junk that's being produced is just going to be seen as junk and marketing trash that's being put out by the distilleries. You know, I think the market's going to evolve in terms of its understanding, but I don't think the market for like the old, the rare and the good bottles is ever going to disappear. And I think it's because it's now this wealth sort of a signifier. A lot of people talk about India and a lot of people talk about China. And what difference does that make? And there's a small element about what I mentioned earlier about the top of the brands being the ones that make it an aspirational brand. So if these brands can get whiskies into those countries, then yes, it might help the aspirational nature. But look at this, right? India is the world's biggest whiskey producing country. The 3 top selling brands of whiskey globally are Indian whiskies. You look at the whiskey yearbook, they've got a beautiful table in the back of there. Scotch whiskey can't compete with Indian whiskey. Even if the tariffs went down to 0, we've still got to get the whiskey from Scotland into India. And if you look at the current market in India, it's a very low value, you know, price sensitive market. So if you're Diageo, if you're Edrington, if you're Beam Suntory or Pernod Ricard, why the hell would you export your products over there? Why not just set up distilleries over there and produce a national product that's consumed? And that's exactly what these distilleries are doing in China and stuff, because for all the will in the world, even if they wanted to take on China and India, they can't produce enough. You know, the Scotch Whisky Association regulations are too constricting to make this sort of super high volume whiskey, which doesn't exist in India and China. So those areas coming on board, yes, that's important, but I think that's going to happen more and more with their level of affluence. So the more affluent that those nations become, the more you're going to have disposable income, and you're going to see, you know, these distilleries targeting the ultra high net worth clientele over there, which will have a knock-on effect on the secondary market and stuff in the UK. But like those demographics and markets are volume, not value, if that makes sense. So overall, my outlook for the next 10 years is very good. It's not going to be level. It's going to be, there'll be ups and downs. There'll be regulation changes, I'm sure. There might be licensing implications that come in here as well. You know, I won't mention the name, but there's a very well-known auction service where you can take photographs of your bottles and they will be listed on the platform, and then you're responsible for shipping the bottles onto the buyer. Well, in the UK, if you do that, technically you need a premises license for where the goods are appropriated to the contract. So that model, if it's happening in the UK, seems to be contravening the licensing laws, and therefore, well, it's wrong. Likewise, if you're like buying and selling bottles at auction all the time, alcohol is a very strictly regulated, controlled drug. There might be tightenings in the law on that side of things, which will have a big impact on the market, and they might be coming in the next 3, 5, 10 years. So there will be roadblocks, things that come and change the market. But overall, it's a very positive market, I think, and it's simply because it's very early in its infancy. This market really only got going in 2015, 2018. So if you're buying in now, you're coming in still at the very start of this market. Whereas if you're looking at luxury watches, you'd have to be going back decades to sort of be back at the start, really.
Yeah, that makes totally sense. And maybe one follow-up question out of curiosity. We were talking as well, about the prime products and how they get marketed by the bigger companies like Diageo and so on. And so they started to reopen as well the distilleries like Brora and Port Ellen, and like where do you see the products of those distilleries? I assume they follow as well kind of the approach, as there is already a strong history with the whiskey and the company, that they kind of will rather release the products at the higher price level.
Yeah, so we saw that with the Brora distillery, which reopened. They released the Brora Triptych, and that was their opening gambit, and it was a £30,000 set. And this is the problem that Brora and Port Ellen are going to face. Well, there's two things here. Them coming back online, those brands are going to become a lot more prominent in collectors' minds. So if you've never heard of Brora or you've never heard of Port Ellen, you probably will do when Diageo starts spending millions of pounds marketing those distilleries again. But the problem is that from day one of production to year 3, it's not legally whiskey. It's 3 years in the oak in Scotland for it to be called Scotch whiskey. And then how much can you sell 3-year-old whiskey for? Well, very little, unless you get creative. Let's say like with the Macallan James Bond series, for instance, that was no age statement whiskey. So it could, in theory, be 3-year-old whiskey. And that was retailing at £600 a bottle, and then secondary market £2,000 a bottle. Now, so I think we're going to see a lot more creativity with those brands. I don't think they're going to go down the no age statement route. I think Brora and Port Ellen are too classy. They will work through some old stock that they've got, but there won't be a lot of it. So I think for maybe a decade, they might just be releasing small batches of very, very highly priced, highly prized, high age statement whiskies. But for the likes of me and you, you know what I mean? We're not going to be able to get near them. But their other bottlings that have been out are going to be, become quite sought after, I think.
So quite creative.
Yes.
Well, from an economical perspective, it definitely makes sense for the companies, probably.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah.
Oh, cool. And so our audience or our customers as well, they are kind of always self-informing as well themselves, before investing into something. So they want to get to know the market, they want to get to know the products, how the money making exactly works, and so on. And so the question is like, where can I easily gather information around the whiskey market? Of course, I would now suggest your YouTube channel as well.
Yeah. So there's two sides to it. You've got data and then you've got understanding. So data, there's a website called Whisky Hunter. You can use that. You can log in and you can search for Macallan Private Eye, and it will bring you a dump of all the data from all the auction houses. It's useful, but you have to be careful. You have to be careful looking at that data, because the levels might have been lower on some bottles and higher on some other bottles. Some may have had the box and may not have had the box. You can click through and you can go and check this, but you can't just take those values at face value. We're seeing now a lot of bottles at auction being sold across Europe and the UK. So some bottles will attract 20% VAT. So let's say that you've got a bottle that normally sells for £5,000 and it all of a sudden appears to have only made £4,200. And you think, wow, God, that's dropped a lot. Well, it probably had VAT applicable on it. 4,200 plus your VAT is £5,040. So the data's fine. The data's the data, but the key thing with data is that it's, 100% of people who drink single malt Scotch whiskey will die. That is a fact. If you look at the data, there's 100% correlation between drinking Scotch whiskey and death, because everybody who drinks Scotch whiskey will die, but there's causation. And it's not to say that drinking Scotch whiskey will kill you. It's just that death is a natural part of being a human. So in order to get the context around the prices, like, we come to my website, marklittler.com, look at our YouTube channel. We put loads of information out there that explains the background of things you might not necessarily sort of see behind them. But between those two ports, Whiskey Hunter for your data and me or my business for sort of like the context and things, that's a very good rounded approach to it, really.
I like as well your investments guides, which you have on your homepage. So
yes,
the one around bottles. I see you as well deep dived or have a section around the whole topic of tokenization and on the bottle market. So really great. I can only recommend the reads on your page.
Yes, yeah. And I do think that the fractionalization, like what I like about the fractionalization, if it's done, and this is not to say that if it's done in a dubious way with someone just minting their own NFTs and stuff like that, but done within regulatory framework and this, that, and the other, is that it democratizes investment to a much wider audience, so that you can get parts of these things. That's what I love about it. So there have been instances of companies that have been doing this in ways that isn't, I would say, healthy. And the key thing is it's sort of like, it's the security of the assets. How secure are those assets? Because people have been taking NFTs and things to say, oh, it's completely secure. Well, time will tell on those things.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And right on to the next question. I think you already very lovely explained how a vertical collection is built up based on the example of the one guy being able to purchase a house after selling his vertical collection of 80-year-old bottles of Macallan. So like, why should often with those vertical collections, you basically pay a premium because you have like a full range of vintages or bottlings, which you basically, it's very nice to look at, and it's kind of as well something unique. So not everyone has that apparently. And so why should you actually pay as well a premium? So this premium for a vertical collection instead of just like going and investing into a single bottle.
So that's a really good point. And the answer is a little bit convoluted, but it's worth knowing. If you decided today to go and collect, like you sold the Easter Oakies vertical, didn't you? If you decided today to go and start buying the Easter Oakies vertical, you're not just looking at buying bottles of the right ones. You're looking for ones that are in very good condition, with very good levels, with their original boxes. So that might put you down to 4 auctions per year of bottles that you want to buy, for your vertical. So, and then you've got that times 6. So you've got 6 bottles in that Easter Oakies vertical. So and you might be 4 that are good enough. Now you're coming as a new player into this market that's already established. So by default of you entering the bidding on these bottles, you're going to start pushing the prices up. And then when people have seen the historic result, they go, well, hang on, when the last one made $5,000, I'm going to have to bid 5.5 on this one. So you bid 5.5, but then somebody else who needs that one bottle to complete their vertical pushes on to $6,000 because it's worth more to them. And then you end up with this sort of like self-fulfilling prophecy where the prices are naturally growing at auction 10-20% a year or whatever. And then you've got people who are interested in these ones trying to build their own verticals, pushing the prices up. And you can end up thinking, right, this 6-bottle collection, I should be able to go out and buy it in a month. Well, no, it might take you 2 years, at which point the market's moved on 25-30%, which means that if you spent 10% over market value to purchase it in the first instance, yes, you've did a bit of future pricing in that, but it's already grown that much in that couple of years that it would have taken. And that only compounds the larger and bigger the vertical is. So the Easter Oakies is very small, 6 bottles, very difficult to get some of those vintages though. But let's say that you looked at the 18-year-old and you're looking at, several dozen bottles. Wow, that's a completely different proposition. And then the point is that, you can't always be a buyer and a seller. The buyer always wants to buy stuff as cheap as possible, and the seller always wants to sell things for as much as possible. So if you're looking to acquire, you can always argue the toss that, it's worth less than this. It's just da. But the buyer will say, well, hang on a minute. If you try and buy these, it's going to take you 2 years to put this together. And, there is a premium to pay for that. A very good instance of a vertical adding value. We dealt with a chap from over York in the UK, and he fell in love with Abelard Rabuna, and he started collecting every year all the bottles that came out. And it got to a point where he was like, I can't control this. I don't have the space for this. So we started advertising it for sale. It was over market value by a decent margin, really. And we were knocked down by sort of some professionals in the industry saying, no, you'll never sell it. The price is not right. Who bought it back? The distillery. And the distillery have now got it pride of place in their visitor centre, because yes, for 80% of the market, if you mark up the price too much, it won't be taken. Someone might think I'll just buy these at auction, but if you're a seller, you only have to appeal to that small demographic, that small part of the market that thinks, I want it. Because if you were the Abelard visitor centre and wanted to start creating a vertical of the Abunas, it would take 3, 5, 8 years to do it. We're selling one collection at the moment, and in there are 36 bottles of 1970 18-year-old Macallan. They would take 29 years to put together if you started buying today based on historic rates, trying to find ones that are in comparable condition and comparable levels. And all the time, these bottles are falling in volume on the market. So the historic data might be 29 years. It might be more like 35. So you have to look at the value that having a vertical adds. It's not worth just the sum of the parts. You're adding value to it by having it. And that's kind of like having something unique. Anybody theoretically can go out and buy one bottle. Some people might be able to go and buy 2 and 3. Are you able to go out and take the entire vertical? And that's where the beauty of those come in.
So I assume it's as well a bit harder to sell them. So it's just like really based on you don't want to sell it at a too low price. So you want to get the right price on it, obviously. So you need as well to be patient and have the time for selling it at the right price.
And it's not necessarily harder to sell. It's just a different demographic of buyer. If you use those Easter Oakies, some of them might be $5,000 a bottle, but you put the collection together and it's whatever. The difference between someone having, say, $5,000 to spend and $50,000 to spend is different. There's arguably a lot more people with $5,000 to spend than there is 50. But again, it just comes down to your approach. It's not just a case of slapping it in an auction and seeing what happens in that 10-day period. Look what we did with that Easter, the 18-year-old vertical for Matthew. We do a huge amount of marketing behind them. We do all these YouTube videos behind them. We reach it out to a massive global audience. Same with the Abelard Rabuna series. Same with all these verticals that we sell. You just have to, I guess it's like trying to sell a Ferrari. There's a heck of a lot more people out there to go and buy a Ford, but there's a very booming business for people who want to buy Ferraris. And it's just that the market is different, and you just present them in different ways to that market. Like you say, you have to be a bit more patient, but it's worth the rewards.
Well, I find it quite funny that the distillery Abelard doesn't keep some of their whiskeys on stock kind of to build up vertical. So I thought that's kind of standard procedures that every distillery, from each product, they put aside at least one bottle.
So legally, they do need to put aside at least one bottle for food hygiene things, if anything has ever contaminated this, that, and the other. But that's not something that you can ever use for marketing purposes. That's not something that they can use. So with that Abuna vertical, you can go to the Abelard Visitor Centre, which is, I think it might be closed at the moment. They're redoing the whole distillery, but they're doing like the Abuna series, like an Abuna tasting event. So you can go and taste several bottles. So they add value, but this is a good point. Like, a lot of these distilleries were overlooking the importance of what they were producing for many years, and now it's kind of like, wow, you know, like, where do we get this stuff? You know, we got rid of it all.
Yeah. Cool. Then the next question, I think we've already basically answered it. I'm now curious. So what is the most underrated whiskey bottle from your perspective?
So I think the most underrated bottles are the ones that, like I mentioned about this paradigm shift, you know, like this change in perspective. Like Glenfarclas is a very good example, because it's a family owned business. So they're not owned by the likes of shareholders and things. So they're not having to make more and more money each year. They're just trying to sort of make as much as they need, really. But it's the ones that are underrated, and this is what we sort of do as a business when we're trying to put collections together for, you know, customers or family offices and things like that. We're looking at bottles that are fundamentally, in our opinion, undervalued in the market. You know, okay, this next to this, well, hang on, there's a huge difference in price there. Why is this? You know, that something can change there. So it's and I think there's a lot of people that try and think whiskey investment is sort of about flipping, about just buying a release and flipping it. Well, there was money in that, and it was quite easy money in that. Nowadays, it's a bit more difficult. Like I say, retail pricing is caught up. But if you want to try and double your money in a heartbeat, just go and play roulette. Like, don't come into whiskey. You know what I mean? Like, all you're doing is dumping stuff on the market, making the market appear softer, for the simple fact that all you're trying to do is buy and resell. You know, it's not clever, that investment. And it's like day trading, but day trading you can do, and you can kind of follow trends and historical values and things. Flipping is like a brand new release with no historical precedent. Let's see what happens on the market. You know, arguably things like the Macallan Folio series, hell yeah, go and buy as many as you can on the ballot. But the problem is with the ballots nowadays, everyone's got everybody auto enrolling into these ballots. You know, you can get bots that help you enroll on these things. Go and do it. You'll probably make decent money, but it's not. There's too many. It's not investment. That's like arbitrage. It's just taking from one market and putting in another. It's not really doing too much, really.
Yeah. I've already tried out the ballot system of Macallan. Usually, as soon as you enter the page, it says like you're in line. It takes around 60 minutes till it's your turn. So
yeah, and like with that, if you're trying to get the Folio 7, which is probably going to be coming out in April, I would have thought, it's a bit late now if you've not bought anything, but join all the old Macallan ballots, buy all the cheap stuff that they ballot, like the classic cuts and the harmonies and this, that, and the other, because they will be looking at your purchasing performance. I don't think it's going to just be completely arbitrary. I think they will be looking at people who've had a history of completing purchases, because it's a good way to identify whether you're a new bot in the system or whether you're a loyal customer in that respect. So yeah.
That would then a bit be like in the when you look at the Hermes bags or the Birkin bags. So you usually, after you spend quite an amount of money in the store, you get your first bag, and it's obviously it's not the bag which you probably would want to have. So it's just like the standard bag which you get first, and then you need to purchase a couple of bags until you really get to the product which you actually want to have. And so so they might want to go into the same direction then.
Absolutely. And there's no doubt that there's people on lists at these distilleries that get early releases to these products that are loyal customers. And, you know, loyalty pays. You know, a lot of these businesses, you think of Macallan as this big multi-billion pound company, which it is, but it's run by people. You know, it's run by normal people. And if you grow personal relations with those people, you will get more benefits. You know, it's those personal relationships that really count for everything.
Yeah. And then we come already to our last question, which is, can I as well earn money with modern bottles which have a price tag below 200 Swiss francs, or let's say British pounds?
So yes, like absolutely you can do. But let's say that, look at that price point under 200, 200 Swiss francs, $200, £200, whatever it is. That whiskey is likely to be either a very low or no age statement whiskey, and it's going to be probably quite mass marketed with a high outrun of bottles. So yes, if you flip it, if the market decides that it likes it, you might double your money. Well done, you've made $200. If if it's like any normal bottling and you make 10% a year, well, you're making $20. You know, I would always say one £5,000 bottle that's growing at 10% a year is better than the same value of lots of smaller value bottles, because you just have if you take one thing from this, is that you've got to look at the things fundamentally propping up those values. You know, low value bottles, while they may grow in the market, why are they growing? It's the greater fool theory. People seeing a jump. Are there people driving the market that you don't know about, that are basically buying and buying and buying their own bottles back to push the price up, so that then when they put their big collection in, the whole market jumps? And it's, you know, so those low value bottles, yes, as a gateway, yeah, absolutely. Buy them, have fun, put them at home, look after them. It's fine. But it's the same with anything. If you want to get, you know, to do this in a bigger way, it's either get deeper pockets, you know, and maybe whiskey investment isn't right for you. I think it's a bit of a misleading thing when people say the money's doing nothing in the bank. Well, the bank is, one, massively regulated, and two, massively safe. Why not go to your financial advisor and say you want to do the most harebrained financial investment that you can come up with, and it would still probably be safer than going out and buying bottles of whiskey from your shop. You know what I mean? From like a regulatory sort of way, those bottles can smash, all sorts of things can happen to them. But the thing is with whiskey, it's fun. It's a great amount of fun. It will bring you into the whiskey world. It's a great community, and you can enjoy drinking the whiskey too. And likewise, the more you get into it, the more you understand it, and then the more you are likely to spot these, you know, you start taking control of your own destiny with these investments, in terms of sort of like, you begin to see why this bottle should be increasing in value, rather than just seeing, oh, it's gone up. You know what I mean? So like the thing with any alternative investment, only invest as much as you can afford to lose. Don't stick your whole pension in whiskey bottles. You know, put in a part of it, because it's going to be part of a very good portfolio. But as we're seeing now with you know, I'm 38, I think I'm 38 or 39, one of the two. It's interesting that younger people have much less trust in banks, and I get that. You know, ever since I graduated from university, I graduated, and several years later, just as we were buying our house, we went through the first financial crisis, and ever since we've just had stagnant wages, stagnant everything, and it's a mess. So I can understand why people will go to alternatives, but like, if you're going to go to alternatives, take a mix, take some whiskey, get some art, get some watches, get some jewelry, get some, you know, that's going to be your hedge, you know, against one market coming up. Because ultimately, and this is a really key point, the value only matters when you're coming to exit your investment. So if it goes up 500% tomorrow and then down 700% the day later, and you're selling it the day later, like, that's the only relevant number to you. So all these markets are going to ebb and flow over the years. So when you're coming to exit, you know, the wider your spread there, and again, that's either a spread of asset classes, or whether it's a spread within a single asset class. So if you've got some modern bottles, if you've got some old bottles, if you've got some, you know, high risk bottles, you know, that sort of spreads, you know, those sorts of spreads will ultimately put you in a better, stronger position at that point of exit.
That was really nice explained, how the importance of diversification. So not only into the whiskey world as such, so not only like putting everything into one bottle, but into multiples, and then expand as well into other categories. And my suggestion, of course, would as well be like to add still the financial products next to it. So kind of having as well alternatives as a part of a well diversified overall portfolio. Yeah. So Mark, thanks a lot. It was super interesting having you on the show and listening to your answers. So I learned again a lot, same as whenever I join your YouTube videos. Maybe closing statement from your side?
Just go and have fun. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, and I think with the fun, the more you understand something, the more you'll enjoy it. So buy some books, go on my YouTube channel, read loads of websites, and just don't be taken in by the sales pitches that a lot of these people will offer you. You know, I think it's just keep it rational and keep it level and like fun. That's the key thing here. You know what I mean? Like, it's, if you can't have fun, then there's no point doing it, is there?
I like that one a lot, Mark. Thanks a lot.
And again, fun. You know, if you've got a whiskey portfolio, well, I think you've definitely earned a right to come and visit Scotland and go around some of the distilleries and visit them and see the people that are involved in the production of it. It's a really small, lovely community, very friendly, and there's loads of whiskey. So yeah, it's win-win.
I can definitely confirm that. Yes. Cool. Thanks a lot, Mark, for being with us. And to the audience again, like whenever you do have questions, like if there are follow-up questions, just like put them into the chat. So you will have the opportunity to ask questions through the chat. They will be directed to me. I will obviously then consult Mark on the answers to get you back with proper answers as well. And yeah, so please keep pulling out questions to us. We're happy to take them. And yeah, I can really only recommend following as well the YouTube channel of Mark and reading his advices, which are always super interesting. With that, again, Mark, thanks a lot, and I wish you all a nice day. Bye.
Take care.
If you like this conversation, you can download our app, visit our website splintinvest.com, follow us on social media, or subscribe to our newsletter, where you'll be informed about the newest podcast episode. Thank you for this, and until next time.